The middle of your book is just as vital as the ending and the beginning. If the middle sags a bit, it can ultimately ruin a perfectly good story. Well, I'm Mike with WriterSanctuary, and week 8 of the Reedsy Master Class in How to Write a Novel, Tom Bromley breaks down the halfway point and ways to plan for the second half. Now, writing is all about sitting down and getting the words out. Now, when you're writing fiction, it's better to push on as you can always fix the story in the editing phase. Now, the first draft doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, the book that you're writing in the first draft isn't going to be the one you publish. Now, if you go back and keep fixing things that don't sound right before you're actually finished with the manuscript, you'll spend most of your time fixing everything that's wrong with it. Now, there is always something a writer will find at fault, and you don't want to get stuck into an endless loop. You don't have to polish up your first draft, and I know several authors who have been working on their second books for the past 5 years doing just that. The bottom line is that the day one video felt more inspirational than anything else. It's all about not being too hard on ourselves and continuing to progress. Most writers will drop off after about the 20,000 word mark, so if you go beyond that, you're already ahead of the game. But day 2 is about combating plot issues and problems. At the middle of the book, it should start to change direction for the flow of the plot and or characters. The risk to reward ratio should increase, meaning you should throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at your character. Now keep in mind that the midpoint of the story isn't necessarily the middle of the book. The middle of the plot could happen much sooner or later. It all depends on how the story progresses. Now, you don't have to try to force the midpoint of the book into the middle of the manuscript. Let it come naturally and as the plot unfolds. Now, on day 3, we looked closer at the wants and needs of our characters. We covered this earlier on in previous videos when setting up the book. However, the midpoint for the character is the catalyst that changes the flow. For example, I've talked about character arcs before. Well, the midpoint for the character is when the arc happens and changes begin to occur. Now, events in your book will shape the character, and the character shapes the events of your book. And the midpoint is when all of those elements begin to shift. Think about it like this. The first half of the book is all about your character's wants, while the second half is all about his or her needs. Now, day 4 was about links within the manuscript and how everything clicks together. Now, the links within your plot are vital, and they should start to unfold in the second half. The hard part is keeping track of those elements, especially if your book has a lot going on. For example, in the first draft of Kingmaker, I completely forgot a very important plot point. Luckily, I was able to fix it up nicely in the second draft without making sweeping changes. But sometimes that doesn't happen. You wind up having the slightest change could ultimately change the entire manuscript. Now, that's an extreme case, but it could happen. That's why it's always good to do a manuscript assessment just to make sure that those links are present and or are being accounted for. The bottom line is that you need to start thinking about how the first and second halves of the book begin to link up. Otherwise, you'll start to create a bunch of plot holes that'll leave the readers scratching their heads. Now, day 5 was about thinking forward and considering how the story is going to come to its climax. Now, good endings rely on counting backwards, making sure that you have a strong sense of continuity. Plotting the book from the ending helps you avoid last-minute ending rushes, which could make the story feel forced and incomplete. Now, one method you can implement is starting to embed some of the hints of the ending within the text by dropping bits of information here and there. It's a foreboding that may not be noticeable until the reader comes toward the ending of the book. And setting up the ending gives the reader a sense of satisfaction when flipping through the last final pages. Now, the author interviews this week were about what the authors read and what elements often influence their own styles. Everyone has their own inspiration and why they write. Now, for me, it was a mixture of a few things when I was younger. The sheer amount of imagination that can drive a story has always fascinated me, such as who would ever have thought to give a kid a purple crayon and let him shape the world as he sees fit. Then I was gripped by Stephen King thanks to Dad being on the monthly fan club deal where new books were shipped out regularly. Needless to say, I read a lot of Stephen King back in the day. Then in 2001, I enrolled in graphic design and computer animation. The idea was to see my ideas come to fruition through graphic design, through like CGI or video games. Well, that backfired spectacularly, and nothing came of it. Nowadays, I am putting some of my better ideas on paper to hopefully entertain those who want to read my work. But overall, I think this week was more about inspiration, continuing, and finding ways to advance forward in the tale. Personally, I don't have much of a problem with inspiration. I am a writer through and through. It's the first thing I think about when I get up, it's the last thing I think about when I go to bed. I rarely have to struggle with any kind of writer's block, and I'm continuously working on my stories no matter what I'm doing. I can be out in the backyard, doing laps, still thinking about my story. For me, my issue is more time related. But that's what happens when you bite off a silly amount more than you can chew. Still, I'm finding my way through this new book and I'm excited for it with each passing week. Now, next week, we'll be looking at writing skills, and I'm looking forward to seeing what I can implement after those classes. Anywho, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. For more videos about self-publishing, blogging, freelance writing, or anything else I cover, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. I think it's going to do it for me today. I'm going to get back to writing. I'll see you next time.